Hamshach Chaim Beis, Volume 1. We're in the middle of chapter 148. That's the middle of page Reish Pei Zayin 287. We're winding down the discussion of Datzcham, Demim Tzameach Chaim Medaber, the four dimensions of the inanimate, the vegetation, the growth that has some element of some visible signs of life, Chai, full life, and Medaber, which is the communicator, the speaker, the Seichel. In Seichel itself, we discussed them. At the beginning of 188, chapter 148, we've been discussing how it's an Atzilus. It's rooted in Atzilus. So Malchus of Atzilus, which is the source of existence, has in it Asiya, action, which is Daimim. Action is the most external Kayach Nivdal, a separate faculty within the soul. That's why it can achieve and affect an act outside of oneself. Then there's Dibur, Tzemeach within Malchus. That's also reaching out to another, but in this case it already has a connect. It's still Ben Adam. When you speak to other people similar to you, so there's a similarity, even though it's outside of you, but there's a similarity. That's the world of, that the first is Asiya, this is the world of Yitzira, which is Tzemeach. Then comes Chai in Malchus. What was Chai? In Bria is a Gili Eriel Yesur, that Nekudas HaMalchus itself pierces the curtain and is revealed in Biyah. He doesn't say this is like Machshava. He just, in other words, he doesn't, this would be like Machshava. Because it's already to yourself, but it's already a Gili, so-called to yourself at least. I'm not saying he doesn't say it, but it seems like from Maisa, Dibur, the Bria would be Machshava, as we've spoken earlier. And then comes Atzilus itself, the Meichin itself, which is Atzilus. Moshe Batzilus. And that's what Malchus is called the Medaber, as we said, not just Dibur, but Medaber, the speaker. Now we continue. And as we discussed, this is all part of the interface and all of the interconnectivity of seeing these four levels on all levels. I'm going to connect it back, of course, to the Nekudas Fida parts of which we've already done. Just connecting it back to Atzilus is all about explaining the four levels in order to understand what the Ovis accomplished and what Matan Teda accomplished after the Ovis. But we'll get to that when we need to get to that. So let's continue. So now he says, so the Isavus, the creation itself comes through Malchus, as we discussed. Both the macrocosm and microcosm, Malchus of Atzilus, and macrocosm, Malchus of Atzilus, the Klolos, which would be the lowest level of the 10 hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum. It just keeps the theme consistent. So Sheda Isavus now is Mechum B'chinas Chesed Atzilus. See, before he said, in the beginning, if you remember, the Moker Hisavus El Mesum B'chinas Malchus. Shedish Hisavus B'chinas Chesed. So it's an interesting diuk. There, Moker, which is always closer, and Shedish is like root. So
one is the source and one is the root.
Yeah. So source would be more active source, so to speak, the immediate source. Where's the flow coming from? Malchus. But as we know, Malchus less l'magam malklum. Malchus doesn't have power of it. So Malchus is itself channeling the faculties of Atzilus. Remember, Malchus is already how it channels it into the next world. But what is it channeling through Yesod? It's channeling from Chesed, which is the root. Now remember, we also said, what did he say before about test? He said by Dibur, and B'chinas HaMalchus Kum Shkabels and B'chinas Yesod, that's Dibur. No, I'm sorry, that's Maisa. When it receives from Teferes, it's Dibur. Just for the record. And now he says the shade of Shavit is from Chesed. That's it. So Commission is Baralel Pedekuf Lama, like we learned before chapter 130, B'Shem HaSefer Shabbeinu Chelik Beis, the name of the Tanya Chelik Beis, remember Hagodl V'Hagiber. I believe that was the topic, Kuf Lamed. Hagodl Hagiber. Let me just check. Yeah, by Shaddai, where he began the topic of Shaddai. Hagodl Hagiber. Hagodl Hagibur. So he's referring back to that in chapter 130. That all the things that are transmitted and come into being from nothing to something. Again, ayin liyesh is from a state of a transcendent state, or a state beyond existence into existence. Comes from the midah, the attribute, the faculty of love and kindness of the Eibishter. Remember, we said that the hashpah on its own would continue endlessly unless he said die, which was to the energy, says die. So the energy itself, everything comes from chesed. Let's prove that the shadish is from chesed, hagadol. So malchus is so-called, the activation is through malchus. But the shadish, the root of it, is from chesed. As we learned, the chesed is the source of the whole flow. So b'chinas ispashas v'gil hachayis l'havis l'hachiyus ha'ilm is an evrei madin kates. That's the extension and the revelation of the life force that brings into being and sustains the worlds and creations for adin kates without end. So that's in general all the hashpahs. And all the sichlim hanefasavim, she's filling in a lot of gaps of how Atzilus creates and brings things into being. The sichlim shenesavu, all the intelligence that will come into being, is from meichin shebechesed. Which again, meichin in midas, in other words. No, all sichlim nivdalim, but all sichlim, he means all sichlim here. All the way to this world. He's trying to say is that even though chesed is love, but it has meichin also. In other words, chesed is the flow. You could say, how could you say it's the flow for everything? Chesed is love. It's not chachnas. He says no. Even this is meichin shebechesed. It's showing how it's the source. Because chesed is also encompasses all the 10 spheres as it's known. See, here we go now back to Partzuf. Remember, we spoke in the Kud is Sfira Partzuf. The Kud is the nucleus, the point before it's developed. We spoke in the beginning of previous Maimer. We started this subject. Actually, this Maimer, what am I talking about? Right here. The Kuda Atzmis. Remember, he said there's the capacity to do chesed, even though you're not doing it yet. That was the Nakuda. Then there's the 10 spheres in Chesed, like the 10 spheres in Chochmah. Right in the middle of chapter 145. So now he's reconnecting to that. He just explained now what's Partzuf. Partzuf is Abiyah. So he explained now how Abiyah exists in all the levels. He started with the Abiyah exists in Medaber itself, in Seichel. Right? And he went how Abiyah is in Atzilus, and now Malchus is Atzilus, and now he's going how Abiyah exists, the Partzuf exists in Chesed. So this is reconnecting to the beginning of the beginning of the Maimer. That's the flow. And the way Chesed is a Partzuf, which means a full structure. Yes, by Abiyah, it hasn't it? Atzilus b'ri yitzir, as this is what he said in the middle of chapter 145 when he said Partzuf. What did he say by Partzuf? I'm just reading it inside. He said, after he finished with Sfira, top of 282. The Mezehu Sheiru Shemokir B'chinas Hadalet Sichlim D'Abiyah. From this is the root and the source of the Dalet Sichlim, meaning the 4 levels of Seichel, I'm assuming, of Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Aseh B'chol HaMadregas Ad Lamata, in all the levels, all the way till below, B'Eschalkus B'chinas HaSeichel, in the distinction, the division of the levels of Seichel that we spoke, the Daimim Tzemeach V'Chaim Medaber. So remember, we spoke that Seichel has in it 4 levels. On our lowest level, Daimim is what's Daimim Shebeseichel technique, right? The craft. Then the Tzemeach Shebeseichel is the innovation behind it, Amtzah. And then comes the Chai. We spoke was how you compose words, And then came Medaber Seichel Be'etzem. Then he explained that, or the Pafrat Alakus. Then he explained how all these 4 levels are in Atzilus, because Atzilus is the root of them, so you have to say that you have all 4 there. He explained how all 4 are in Malchus. Now he's explaining how they're all in Chesed, so he's going back here. So B'meila, since everything from Chesed is the root, like we spoke in chapter 130 of the whole flow, so Chesed also has in it all the 10 spheres, and has in it also the Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah, because from it comes everything, including the Sichlim that go into the other worlds. So what do you have to say? You have to say that in the Meichin of the Midas you have Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah. Basically. So he's basically connecting it all. You can ask, why is he saying Seichel Dafki? Say Chesed has parts of Atzilus B'ri Yitzir in general, because he wants to show that everything we discussed, the 4 levels in Seichel itself, also come from Chesed, from the Meichin of Chesed of Atzilus, which immediately evokes that it means Meichin of Midas, Meichin within Midas. That's also clear here. Then there's going to be Meichin within Meichin. So there's a lot of interconnectivity. I'll sum it up again, but
Meichin and Midas, the bigger picture, isn't that Samech? Like
the big, and then there's a level of Meichin, and Meichin too has in it Midas.
Yeah.
All levels have all the levels. That's clear. In general, it breaks down to Dem Tzemech Chaim Medaber. We spoke about it earlier. We said there's Midas have a little Meichin, then there's Midas Arabas. Gadlus HaMidas have like Yaakov, Yisrael Zuta. Yisrael Saba is Meichin as it speaks to Midas, meaning the Midas Sheva Meichin. Then there's Meichin Be'etzem. Right now he's speaking Chesed, he's climbing. He started with Malchus, he said all 4 are there, now in Chesed. And he's saying, so it has all 4. So the bottom line is, even though we learned that there's also Medaber in Atzilus, and that's the source from Medaber in Bria Yitzir Asiyah, but since Chesed is the channel now, so in Chesed there's also all the Meichin, so the Meichin of Chesed, they become the source for all the 4 different types of Seichel, because in Chesed itself you have all 4 levels. That's Chesed. So now we've covered Chesed. So far we've covered the 4 in Seichel. We went to Lakush, the 4 in Atzilus, the 4 in Malchus, the 4 in Chesed. Now he goes, I'm sorry. And now he goes even further. The same is high in the levels higher than Chesed. The mebchinas abiyah shebehem nimshe b'chinas hasichlim dabiyah lamata.
The root.
Yeah, in the seichel itself. In other words, the levels higher than Chesed, the abiyah from them comes the sichlim, the intelligence abiyah in Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah lamata, all the way to the lowest level. No. I mean, everything is through Chesed, but he says Chenu B'madreg is higher than Chesed. You also have the 4 levels. Yes, Kamesha Amrazal, like Razal say, Yudeya Hoye B'tzal L'tzaref Eisi Sheniv Rubem Shemayim V'aretz. Comes to B'tzal who built the Mishkan, so he had a particular wisdom, Batzal Kael, to be able to combine the letters. He knew the secret of the configurations, essentially, that created heaven and earth. Because remember, Shemayim V'aretz is Tasar Mamoris, but there's a lot of configurations. It was a whole divine secret behind it all. Tihine b'dvar havaya Shemayim nasu. Because now b'dvar Hashem Shemayim nasu, the words of Hashem, of God, the heavens were made, like we said this earlier before when we spoke about Dibur and Asiyah. Omnam tziruf eisi ze'in haskolos hadibur shelamayil me'esis, like we spoke earlier. So yes, b'dvar Hashem Shemayim nasu, but the combination, the tziruf, the union, the tziruf, the configuration of the letters, that's already more than just the Dibur. That's already haskolos hadibur. That's higher than the Eisis. Remember, we learned this already. This is who b'chinas seichel shebebriya. That was the 3rd level. We spoke about chai. B'chinas chai shebeseichel. Hanimsha b'chinas bina shebechesed. So we learned this before. We learned it on a lower level. Remember, we learned that in human intelligence. In human intelligence, we learned there's technique, like the craft. umnis, the umnis, what did he say? Tziyur, chochmas at tziyur, etc. So there you have, that's the daimon within seichel. Tzemeach, we said, was the amtzah, the conception, the idea, and so on. But then there was a seichel in how you form words. Remember we spoke about Meichen the Katniss from the Eitz Chaim, that a child has to go through that stage of development, even if he has a mouth and he has intelligence, to actually be able to form words is a particular wisdom. We said that's chai, that's bria in seichel. But that's seichel tachma, seichel of, as you call it, seichel hanivroim. Now we just established in this chapter that this is rooted in the seichel of Atzilus. So where is it rooted? That's what he's discussing now. So where's it rooted? This is what Betzalel knew. It's rooted in, he says, Chai Shebesechel, and this comes from Bina Shebechesed. Because we just established that Chesed is the flow to the lower levels. And there was the Meichen in Chesed. So there's Chachma in Chesed. There's Bina in Chesed. Bina is always Mekanana, is nested in Bria. Then there's Midas in Chesed would be Zah, that's Yitzira of Chesed. And then Asiyah of Chesed would be the Daim of Chesed. So he's explaining this comes from Bina of Chesed, this wisdom. Umesham ha'yeshedish nishmas betzal shazein batzel, betzel keel ha'yusa. So it says that. Why was he called Betzalel? Because he was like in the shadow of God. He had the power of Hashem. When he tells Moshe, Moshe says, you could see that you have the wisdom that God implanted in you. So the root of Nishmas Betzalel is Bina of Chesed, which is the Bina, which is the ability to combine words in the Shadish now. Now we're not talking the child. We're talking the Atzilus. It's Bina of Chesed of Atzilus in order to form words. You follow the Cheshbon?
I'm following, but we didn't go higher than Chesed.
He did. He said before higher than Chesed. Now he went now. Yeah, clearly, yeah. Well, he could also say there's also Bina.
But he says Kein Hu b'Madegish from Ma'alim Chesed. Could be that's within Chesed. Ma'alim Parts of Chesed. In other words, in the Meichen of Chesed.
But what's higher than? But the Bina is there's nothing. The Bina is the lowest of the Meichen. But there's the lowest of Meichen is Bina. So there's nothing lower. So we need Lamaila.
Of Chesed, of Midas.
But he said Meichen the Midas already. Yeah, no, it's all right. It's back and forth. Remember, there's a period after Lamata Chulu. You see, before Kamei Manazal. So Kamei Manazal can go back to the general picture. Remember, Bina Sheba Chesed is rooted in Chesed Sheba Bina. So ultimately, it is higher too. He's right now speaking Bina. Let's see, maybe he's going to follow it out, maybe not. But either way, it's clearly what's going on here. In other words, after he finished establishing, he's going back to so-called, it's called confirming it. Right? Here we go. Good. And that's why he knew how to configure, how to join the words in order to build the Mishkan. Interestingly, you see, so we have here Seichel of Nevraim, we have the Seichel of the Eibishter and how he creates the world, and then we have the Seichel of Betzalel, how you build the Mishkan, because he knew how to use the words that God created the world with to be able to build the Mishkan. Which is, Mishkan is already a higher level than the world itself.
What was the depth? I mean, the Eibishter told him exactly how to build it.
Shal and the Gemara. The Gemara says clearly that it's not the Hasham's words.
No, he did itself, but...
And this was considered a big wisdom, was considered this.
He built it with words, I mean, he said words.
He knew the secret of how to make a Mishkan for Hashem.
He combined words and just...
it wasn't magic.
He didn't
it was in
words, like Hashem said words and then there was a...
No, he didn't say words. But he knew the inner secret of the inner structure of how to build it. The Mishkan was not just a technical building here. It's a Gemara, it's a brachas, I think. The Binya Beis HaMikdash hay bedugma shalamayla. Here we go. The building of the Beis HaMikdash was an example, was like a
paradigm of the Mila.
Like a mirror.
A microcosm.
Yeah.
Was similar to above. A replica, you can say, but bedugma here means more like an example, a reflection of a mirror image. Like it says in Medrash Rabbah, Trum Pashlam Gimel, the Kol Masha Bara Kadosh Baruch Hu L'mayla Bara Lamata. That everything God created above, He created below. He's explaining it. The Chiddush here. Ubetzal sheyedei letzaref eisius, and Betzal, who knew how to combine these words, these letters, Hoyal Yodei Binyan Hamikdash. Through him was the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Even though the Mishkan was the Beis Hamikdash.
I can believe it. What does combining the words mean in this case, though?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
In other words, he had instructions from Moshe how to build a thing.
Combining words, but it's a funny way to say.
In this hand.
This is a Gemara. It's nothing to do with Ayin Beis. Let's just start with that. The Gemara says that Betzal Kel,
He was endowed
he was endowed with a wisdom that other people did not have, to know how to build a temple for the Eibush in this world. It's not a contractor here. We're not talking about putting up a store or a house. We're talking about building the Beis Hamikdash that's Dugan Shel Maila. Now, God created the world with 10. In this Aleph Beis of Chassidus, God created the world with 10 utterances. Right? What does that mean? And then he goes on, Shaykh and says that you have a world that's far more than 10 objects in this world. So he says it's all the combinations and configurations of the same 22 letters. Permutations. So there's a whole secret in how these permutations work. That's all the gematrias and the letters, the shape of the letters, their meaning, their color, their number, their configurations, permutations, tzirufim, tmuras, chilufim, the whole wisdom. That's how the wisdom. These are essentially it's the source code for existence. These are Saram Amaras. They have within them the 10 spheres, which also have all these permutations and configurations. So Tzal was endowed with this wisdom of knowing how to be mitzvah of these letters. He says that's why he knew how to build the Mishkan properly.
That implies from the inside out.
I'm sorry?
That implies from the inside out. Through his tzivra, he was able to create an object.
I don't know. It doesn't imply anything. You can learn the Gemara in 1,000 ways. Obviously, you also needed materials. You need how to know how to craft gold, shape gold into objects, and so on. But the Mishkan is a complicated structure. The Mishkan has a soul to it, has a body to it. He also had to know how to physically build it. There were walls, there were vessels. There's a whole parsha Truma Tetzavik. The parshas talk of the details of how they build the Mishkan. So there's it's very clear. I mean, there's two parts to it. There's the part of physically building. There's also knowing the spirit of it, of how the understanding what the Mishkan should be like in the proper way that it's example to above. It was a microcosm of existence. There's entire Svarim written just explaining how every detail in the Mishkan is reflected in existence. You never heard this before? You've never heard that before? Really? The Mishkan has 3 sections of the body. This is the Bechai, the Shalah. There's a whole book called Teres Eilah from the Ramah. Whole book dedicated to that. It's many sikhs dedicated in explaining how the Beis Hamikdash is a model for the human being. The physical body, which we ourselves at Salam Elikim, the Mishkan look like whole Seder Shtalshlos. There's Moichin, the Beis Hamikdash, Kedesh Kedoshim, the Aron. There's the three kelim is like Chesed Gvura Teferes. The legs are like the Mizbeach HaChitzon that goes outward. Anyway, there's a lot of details. The bottom line is the Mishkan was as you can imagine, it says V'shchanti b'seicham. God must rest among you, not in it, because the Mishkan was an example of us, an example of existence. So there was a whole wisdom. Both the architectural part was a wisdom, and there's a spiritual part wisdom. That's what Betzal knew how to do. This was Bina Shebechesed. It's like Bria. This is like the Bria, because this is the power of Chai, as we said, L'tzaref Esis. But it's not Meichen Be'etzam yet. This is already Meichen in application. That's why Moshe didn't build it, because Betzal was the architect. He knew how to apply. Moshe was the visionary, which is why Moshe said, first build the Kelim and then the Mishkan. That's where this whole thing began. He said, first build the containers and then the Mishkan. So Betzal said, that's not the Derech HaElah. Not the way of the world. The way of the world, first you build the container, the structure, then you bring the vessels. And where are you going to put the vessels? So there's all the explanations. Basically, Moshe was the visionary. He knew the purpose was the vessels. But practically, you first have to build the Mishkan and then. In Derech Mitzvah Sechel, there's a whole maamar called Mitzvah's Binyan Mikdash. He explains the Mishkan itself is makif. The kelim are pnimi. So Moshe knew the kavanah was pnimi, to bring it internally. And Betzalel knew that the way to do it, first you have to start with makifim, then you come to pnimi. So bottom line is there's a wisdom here, but it's a wisdom that's applied wisdom. So it's true, it's above midas, it's above malchus, above maisa, it's above dibur, but we're dealing now with the keich, how to combine words, which by the way explains another thing, that in medaber itself there's 4 things. There's medaber, actually the way of speaking words. I'm just adding something, it doesn't say it specifically, but I'm realizing that it comes out of this. There's the intelligence that goes into what you're saying. What are you saying? That's like the tzemeach in dibur, in medaber. There's then the intelligence of combining words that we said is a particular seichel, not just what you say, but how you configure, how you combine, how you join letters. And then there's the seichel be'etzem.
Because we can learn that many chapters back. You could say it in one way, but he chose to say it another way, right?
Yeah. And then there's the medaber itself, sheba medaber, that's the pure seichel within the seichel. So Betzalel is step 2, or step 3 from the bottom. He's how dibur, he's how the seichel in the combination of the letters, okay, that works very well. So when you speak, so even in medaber you have all 4. There's actual technique of speaking, like in public speaking, and you can train someone on all 4 levels. How to actually form, how to the technique of actual saying words, the intelligence in it, how to combine letters, and the intelligence behind the whole. Very good.
The second level, we're picking out how to say it.
Second level is what to say, the idea about and within it.
From the bottom up.
I'm not sure what you mean by bottom.
Tzemeach.
Yeah, that's what he says. He says Amtsah, the conceiving of these words. Actually, I don't know if it's the intelligence within the words. No, I have to correct that. It's probably the intelligence that's informing the actual expression. Then you have the combination of the words, and then you have the intelligence in the actual whatever is being conveyed. Yeah, the second level is more of the intelligence within what you're conveying. So this is Chachmas Betzalel. Now we go further, page Reish Beches 288. Well, the Ma'alim is Chachmas Shlema, and higher than Betzalel was the wisdom of Shlema. Tiksiv Hashem Nasan Chachmas Shlema. He's going back to the beginning of the Maimon already. And higher than this was the wisdom of Shlema. Like it says, Hashem gave wisdom to Shlema v'nusina zu. And what did he impart? What was the gift? Who gam came up b'chinas chesed elyon. It also comes from chesed elyon, but this time he him b'chinas chachma shebechesed. It is definitely a new Indian here. This is now chachma shebechesed. So bina shebechesed is Betzalel, which is already more connected to the permutations between in the letters. Chachma Shleim is Chachma Shebechesed. In parentheses he adds, B'derech Klal Chachma Shleim b'chinas Tiferes, v'Shalshon b'chinas Chachma Shebechesed. In general, we say the wisdom of Shleima is Tifer, is Chachma Tatah rather. I'm sorry, Chachma Tatah. Correct. Okay. See, without reading glasses, it can confuse Tiferes. So, general Chachma Shleim is the level of Chachma Tatah, which is rooted in Chachma Shebechesed. Chachma Tatah actually is usually Malchus. Okay, he's just qualifying it based on what it says in different places. But it's rooted even in Chachma Tatah, because Shlomo was Malchus. So Shlomo was Chachma of Malchus, essentially. He was a Melech. It says David was Malchus of Malchus. Chachma of Malchus was Shlomo.
So, that's why he didn't have any life, and he had to get.
Never the Mamti, yes. David, that is, he was Bar Nafla.
Yeah, because he was Malchus.
Right. Get the 70 years from Adam and the Ovis, yeah. So Shlomo B'chlal is Chachma Tatah, but it's rooted in Chachma Shebechesed. And Betzalel is Bina Shebechesed. So we're going back to Chachma Bina again, and the first 2 levels. The Nishma Shleima L'Moshe. I'm sorry. The Nishma Shleima L'Mata, because the soul of Shleima below, Hoya Neshama D'Atzilus Mamish. was mamash a neshama of Atzilus. It was literally a soul of Atzilus. V'achachma shaloi hi askola atzmis dvelikus. Leilak l'tzaref esis. So his wisdom, right, was a core haskola. Like we said, haskola atzmis. Remember we said it was Abba v'imei Eloyin. Chachma, not bina. Not tfuna. Not Yisrael Saba v'tfuna, but chachma. Leilak l'tzaref esis. Not just the wisdom that combines words and letters that we spoke about B'Tzalel, which is the level of Chai, Bria, in Medaber, in Atzilus. Because when the Eibishter says, see by B'Tzalel it says he gave him the wisdom how to combine the words, the letters. By Shleima it says, Vashem nosen chachma l'shleima. Chachma clearly implies more than just combining words. It implies that he had some core intelligence, chachma shleima, that was askola atzmis. For hoysa askola b'chinas ein seif. And his seichel and his intelligence was literally Ein Sof. It's an interesting interpretation. That's why to the extent, to the point that you needed 3,000 examples to get a small taste, a small comprehension, an edge of a glimpse into the intelligence of Shleima. So usually you say Vayimshel Shleima, Shleisaf of a Moshel, was the other way around. The Shlem was so smart, he was able to give 3,000 examples. Here, he's saying that you need 3,000 examples. Not that he was able to. You actually need it. I don't know if that's the pshat in the actual posuk. But okay, either way, it means that he basically, you need all these examples. That shows, he wants to show how, what's called seichel atzmi. It's so beyond application. Remember, we learned seichel is a private thing, internal. So the deeper you are, maskil is internalized. It goes inward. Midas is what goes outward. So you need the 3,000 examples to bring it down, basically.
So if he spoke to a normal person in the Chassidus, he had to go down 3,000 levels, one by one, or would he just go to the 3,000?
Don't get so excited. We're soon going to learn that Parah Aduma was Elmati of Chakma v'Yidechekim Imenu. So there's even beyond Shleima. Shleima is just a small fry here. But relative to us,
no, he's saying anytime he wanted to speak to anybody, he had to give him 3,000 Mashal.
He had to go down 3 levels? Or
why do you have to say that? Why do you have to say that? If you want to get into his core intelligence, you need 3,000 examples. If he said good morning, I don't think you need 3,000 examples.
Not, but,
so
that's why I use the example of this.
Be practical.
If you give me a Chassidus share, you have to go down 3,000, or you go down to the 3,000 immediately. How does that work? This is the 4th level. This is the level of Seichel of Medaber. It's not working? The Seichel of Medaber. Shehu B'chinas Atzilus. This is the highest and 4th level Seichel of Medaber. This is the level of Atzilus. V'chein hasogas hamalachim. Same with the comprehension of angels. Angels are basically entities in Bria and Yitzira. They usually hang out.
In the chambers and corridors.
Shir gvul hasagosam nimshach v'nisavim ayin liyesh. The measure, the parameters of their comprehension is drawn and comes into being from nothing. Ayin liyesh always means from a state of divine nothingness, so to speak. Not nothing as in nothing, but as in beyond. Tiyesh, mipchinas chesed atzilus. That also comes from chesed of atzilus. So it looks like what he said before, Lamaila, was almost not a Maimer HaMuzga, but it was almost just to qualify, to make sure that it's not just a chesed, it's also on the higher levels. Because he's still focusing primarily on chesed here. He said by Shlomo also, he said it was chochmah shebechesed. Yesh b'malachim b'derech klal beis madreges yetzer misharsim v'asher misharsav. So they also come from chesed atzilus, their hasaga, their intelligence, and malachim itself. In general, there's two levels: yetzer misharsim, v'asher misharsav. The pashtus, there's plenty of commentaries on this. Yetzer misharsav are those that he formed, these misharsim, these assistants. The Asher Misharsim are those that assist him. Yetzer is lower. It's like
he created, and Ashram Yisrael are the ones that are already there serving him. That's Bapashtas what it means, I believe. But bottom line, there's two levels. I guess Yetzer is Yitzira and Asher is Bria. Let's see. There are angels that are called Emdim. So we say Srafim Emdim. Srafim are generally in Bria. The Emdim, they're in a state of upright standing, which has both miles. Sometimes it says Emdim is Chsarn because it's not walking, moving. But on the other hand, it's upright and not lying down. They're like.
Is that what it means, or it means that they're perpetually in the same level? They don't climb any higher or lower.
Depends. Different places. Here, let's see what he's going to say. That they stand, they perpetuate. They're perpetuating from the beginning of creation, and they're not, and they don't become eliminated. They don't become annihilated and nullified through their comprehension. So even though they burn with passion, I don't know if he's going to mention that, but the bottom line is Emdim means that they persist, they perpetuate, they're perpetual, they remain standing, and they don't. In other words, they're strong and they're standing firm. That's what it means here. What are you saying? That's how he's interpreting it here.
Right, but didn't we learn in other places that, and I'm not being from
what's the contradiction?
Srafim I always get nisif, they become like annihilated.
Yeah, but they still say the next day, they don't get annihilated. It says they're constantly burning with passion.
Burning up, and others, it's not the same.
He's not, right now he's not qualifying that. Here he's talking about the element of Emdim. To me, I always understood that they're always passionate. They remain Emdim, but they're always like in this fiery passion. It's different explanations. It's not a contradiction. Because I'm sure there's levels in Srafim itself. Sometimes it says Srafim Emdim Amalei because Makom Sham Achshavti Shaladim Sham Hunimtza. Let's see how he interprets it here. Sometimes Emdim is brought also as a negative, that they can't shift from their state, from their qualitative state. They always remain Mahalchim Beina Emdim Aneshamas. Okay, so he's saying Husha Emdim. They're not misbattle, and that's the Amidas Kodesh. When we say Kodesh, 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 when the Srafim Malas, what do they say? Kodesh, because they're appreciating, they're comprehending Erein Sof Shekodesh Umuvdal. He's explaining it's also Aveidadik here. Let's see where he's going with it. But he's explaining that this Hasoga Malachim is internal. Does not nullify them. They remain standing. Say from Emdim. It's a nice way of explaining it. Srafim. What's Srafim Emdim? Why don't you say Srafim? Emdim, what is the point Emdim? Basically saying that they are consistent and persistent, perpetuating their comprehension. That's what Amidas Kodesh said. They're saying Kodesh. They're always aware and cognizant through their comprehension and Erein Sof, that's Kodesh Umuvdal, that's holy and removed and separate. Kedusha. The Levad Shemasig Meseir V'Achayis Elikem Mislabish B'Teichem Nachyesam. Besides that fact that they comprehend the energy and the divine life force that's manifested in them to sustain them, that's Srafim Shazay. You named them Malay Legabe Shem Adnai. What means Malay? They stand above him. Above whom? So he says here above Shem Adnai. Shazau Achai Shalem Shamislabish B'Pnim Yishmal Kumi Adnai Bom. Is that a pasuk? Adnai Bom. So in other words, there's a chayis inside of them, they stand above it, the gabi shem adnei, which is the energy that manifests inside them internally, like we say adnei bom. I guess it's an expression somewhere, adnei bom, so adnei is within them. So that's one thing. So in addition to that, that's levadzes. Remember we learned Mevin Dover Meteich Dover by Sipur. Not only does it appreciate the story that which manifests in them, they also comprehend the Erein Sof that's Kodesh Umuvdal. Okay, because the Srafim are in the world of Bria. Okay, what he's saying here is, besides what they have in Bria, they comprehend the level of Bria, they also comprehend Malchus, because Malchus that's in Bria. Remember he said that was Chai.
Shebe Atzilus. That's the Beker that pierces the Parsa. So you have the first two levels, Mais and Dibur. That's, let's say, in Bria, Mais and Dibur are lower levels. The Srafim, first of all, appreciate the Bria Shebe Bria. That would be the Adnai. And in addition to that, they also appreciate the Malchus of Atzilus from a higher level that's beyond them. Okay. So they're in the world of Bria. This Hasaga comes also, he says, from Chesed of Atzilus. Mm-hmm. He's still in the middle of talking about two levels of angels. We'll explain it all. Let's just go through it. And they don't get nullified through this comprehension. That is Asher Misharsov, apparently. So that's level one. Asher Misharsov is Bria, or in Sfiras that would be Bina, that understands its own level. It also has a sense of Malchus of Atzilus, of the Medaber, Shebe, the highest, the fourth level, but only as it's distant from them.
That's Kodesh.
So this is more like Bitzalel, you can say. Similar more to Bitzalel. We'll see. Well, let's see what the next level is. So from this fact he says Yetzer Mishasavim, apparently the first one is Asher Mishasav of the Serafim. Is that stim? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's Serafim. These is another level. This is a level that that's why it's Asher Mishasav. Not Yetzer. He's not shaping. They're not being created. They're here from the beginning of creation. They were put in place in the beginning and they remain standing. That's why he called them Asher. Those that serve him. Meaning those that are already there. Yetzer Mishashav implies that they're being shaped as we speak. So he says, these are the angels, Shemisavim B'chol Yom, that are coming to being every day. How? Through the refinement of the sparks, that the souls of Israel are refined below. And they elevate, ascend, and encompassed in the level of Malchus.
Wow.
So that's another level. In other words, so there's two angels. There's angels that were set in place in the beginning of the creation that say Kadosh, Kadosh. In a sense, their role is almost like the watch, the door. What do you call them? The doorkeepers, not doorkeepers. The gatekeepers.
The Yetzer guys join the Asher guys.
I don't know. It doesn't talk about it. Are you processing or you're observing now? So that's there. And then there's what's created through Birudim, there's Yetzer Mishasav. Chatzir, that's how you pronounce it? Yeah. That's miach, you plant, so Chatzir lebehema, which is hay, oats.
Grass, I think.
Chatzir is grass.
Cut grass, which is turns into hay.
It turns into hay. Matzmiach chatzir lebehema. What's the pshat here? What is that negay here? So he's going to say behema gematria ban. Behema is the gematria of ban.
You don't say it every day. It's in Bachim Avshi.
But it's nun.
It's not today in the Kuf Mem.
It's in Bachim Avshi.
V'hu b'chinas malchus v'chotzir hein b'chinas malachim hanal shenechlom b'chinas malchus. So behema is ban. That's malchus. And the chotzir, these are the angels that are created shenechlolim that are encompassed in malchus.
It's in Bachim Avshi. Because their creation is they were created with a limited comprehension. Remember, he said before, Srafim Masigim B'chinas Eidei Ein Sof. They relate to something that's Eidei Ein Sof. Here we're talking on far lower level. So Behema is Ban, that's Malchus, and Chotzir is the Malachim that are encompassed in Malchus. So Chotzir is what you feed the Behema. So you're feeding the Ban. Those are the Nitzutzes that allow the Behemoth to be elevated into Malchus. I think he's going to spell it out.
Maybe. I'm not sure exactly. Let's see what he says. Okay, so this is Hasaga Mugbal. 1 second.
And when it illuminates in them a little more gili, revelation from Malchus, they are mizbatlim, as opposed to Srafim. They are nullified, and they are elevated and encompassed inside of Malchus. Hold on. So Behem is Ban. That's the level of Malchus. We just said Malchus of what of Atzilus. And then they're fed some Malchus. So Ban is unlimited comprehension. But through the Aveda that we do below, we give them more. And they elevate and become this battle there.
Well, they come into being from our Birurim. Yeah. Then when it radiates from them from a little bit more from Malchus, then they become consumed into Malchus.
No.
They brought in Ban, and then they get a raise from the sparks from down here.
Isn't that what it says?
No. Elim Nechlolim, he says.
Become consumed by Malchus.
It says it twice. He says what we're mavader, that's Chatzir lebehema.
Chatzir is the Malachim.
No. Chatzir is not the Malachim. Chatzir is
it says Chatzir heim b'chinas Malachim.
Right. That's what? Yeah. Chatzir is the Malachim that are created through our work.
Yeah.
So that's my point. So what's Ban is the behema. That's the netzutzos are trapped down below. When we do Aveda and we elevate that's the Chatzir. We create angels that go up into Malchus on a higher level. That's what he's saying. Not what you just said. That's the Aveda. The Chatzir the Behema is the Malachim that come as a result of our working. So we're feeding the Behema and we elevate it into Malchus where it becomes Batel. Look, he says the words Elim Nechlol B'chinas Malchus twice. Right? He says what? And that's the meaning of Matzmiach Chatzir Lebehema. That's the work we do. We're Matzmiach Chatzir Lebehema. The Behema is the netzutzos that are below. When we elevate them, that's what we're doing. We're creating Malachim Chatzir that makes the Behema go up and become this battle. As opposed to Srafim have a relationship with that level. It's beyond them, but they relate it. They don't have to disappear, nullify. That's what he's saying here. It's a lower level. Let's see. I don't want to conclude anything until I see the whole subject matter. Because remember, this is all Malachim. This is in Malachim itself. He's talking about Chesed of Atzilus that gives Malachim the comprehension. It's lower than Malchim. It's lower than Shleima.
Not the Yotzer ones. He's talking about different Malachim at this point.
No, we're talking about the Yotzer Mishra. Yeah. Let's see here.
As soon as we make them, they disappear, basically.
I don't know which would disappear. They get consumed into Malchus, into a higher level. Yeah. Nothing disappears. It depends whether it's remains standing in its original shape. Here, the point is that you wanted them to be subsumed, as they say.
They're fed the sparks emanating from the Ban of Asiya.
It doesn't say Asiya. He says Ban.
They don't know where it's from.
It can be any level. It's a lower level where the Ban is. And this is what it says in Zeir al-Pasuk Kanal, and the Pasuk of Matzmiach Chatzir Lebehema. What does he say in Zeir? The Behema Rabbah. The Revia al Elef Turin will be Gemiya Chada L'chichuslon. Okay. So Behema Rabbah, which is a great Behema, the great animal, in other words, it's a high level. Or not to say a high level, a powerful animal, you can say a powerful Behema. The Revia al Elef Turin, like what is it? How do you say it? Not climbs, klettert. It's like when you say Ari Revi al Mizbeach, it's like
crouches.
Huh? I don't think crouches. I think it's more like from the word Revi. What? As what? What does that mean?
Reveya Nirva. Behemoth that's a Reveya. You can't call him Mizbeach because he's a.
But that's not Reveal with an Aleph. That's Reveal El Tuna sounds like to me that he elevates or climbs on 1,000 mountains.
Touring the mountains here.
Yeah.
Pashtus looks like it's like a Behema Rabbah. That's, let's see. Ubegemiya Chada Lechichuslon.
So sweet pastures on this
One
mountain.
gulp, he could consume all those mountains, no?
Look in the Zayah, but that's it. Well, B'Gemia Chada with one swallow, one gulp, l'chichuslun.
Yeah, Lixit means like he bears it.
It contains them all. Contains them all. Let me read the pirush a minute. Kumel derech mashal, like an example. Behema sheisa b'Gemia. For example, behema who drinks. B'Gemia means a gulp, or B'Gemia means coming from like he's drinking from a
gulp.
B'Gemia chad. Yeah, usually, but there's sheisa b'Gemia. Ha'idei she'idei chizek ruach pia elamayim k'shecherez zarur nimshachem hamayim al pia. He's referring here to something very specific.
That's interesting.
What he's saying is like when there's a very strong wind on the water. So what does the wind do? It blows away the water. Then when the wind goes away, so the water is drawn up into its mouth. It's like almost like a vacuum.
Yeah, a vacuum.
So let me read this again.
Like it opens up his mouth and everything goes in.
It makes
Right.
the wave coming back to its place, and that gives them the force to go in.
Reveals.
Gemia is not just a gulp. Gemia is definitely referring to a particular way of drinking, probably. That's why he says, because it says sheisa b'Gemia. So that it's like blows pia of what? Of the mouth of the behemoth.
Yeah.
So through blowing very strong on it, it sounds to me almost like it's like licking it up, like sucking it up. But it sounds like it's maybe like that. It's sucking in. That's probably what it means. Not that it. Like Chazer Saruach, he means is like inhaling.
Yeah.
He's inhaling it.
Right.
So that's what it means.
The
That's how Gemia works. So Gemia works that he makes a very strong inhale. So there's a ruach pia. There's a very strong vacuum pull, tugging, sucking it in. That's what he's saying here. Okay, but how does that help here? 1 second. So Behema Rabbah goes on these mountains. And the via usually means like climbing. What does it say? Arya Revia al Mizbeach. It's like the fire. It like climbs all over climbing on the mountains, and with one suck, with one gulp, l'chichuslun, it sucks it all in. Basically, swallows it all in. So that's the example, like a behemoth that drinks like that through a very strong vacuum inhale, it tugs it all in. How does this help here? Okay, let's see. V'cheinu b'malachim now. So now we're saying the malachim chatzil lebehema. That's the same thing. What's the same thing with b'malachim? Shadei agilu shenimshach aleim b'chinas hamalchus hareim elim v'nechlolim.
From the sucking that
Yeah.
Malchus pulls them.
So in other words, they're losing their identity.
They get sucked into mouth.
So the behema rabbah, in other words, through the birurim that we do, it's almost like the consumption, like when you eat something. And you free the sparks by digesting it. Here he's doing that's the Gemia here. That's what he's saying basically. That through the that goes on them, that reveal to them from Malchus, they elevate and are encompassed in that level. Avla malachim shenikra that's malachim misharsu yetzu misharsu. But the malachim that called eimdim, the srafim, he said, hu sheichem lekabel seir ve'enem is batlin basagasa. They do not. You see, by ban, the only way to elevate it is by consuming it. Because if you leave it where it is, it's just going to remain standing there. So chatzil behema means. See, the thing is, what's confusing me is chatzil behema is there that the behema is eating, and here the behema is being consumed. No, the behema. It's always the behema that's What would he say was the behema again?
It was the consumer.
Ben is behema, gematria ban, Prince Malchus.
He's the behemoth.
Is the behema. The chatzir is the malachim that come through our Aveda.
That's what we're saying. Yeah.
Through our Aveda, Malchus, a higher level of Malchus, as he says, so Malchus on its own is the behema.
That's the one that consumes.
That's ban. Huh?
That's the one that consumes.
No, the lowest, it's like almost like Damim Shebe Malchus, like something like that.
The one that does the consuming is Malchus.
Yeah, but when it consumes something higher, something more, it gets a hechel gili, that's chatzir. That comes through our Aveda when we elevate things.
That gives it extra strength.
That's amazing.
That the pulls the behema pulls, so the behema elevates to another level.
Pulls the chatzir.
Yeah, so it pulls it in, and now it.
Now it's fed more, so it has a more keich.
So what's getting fed? Malchus.
Yeah.
It's getting fed.
But in the process, it's losing its identity somewhat.
Losing it?
No.
No. The malachim are losing their identity. I'm sorry. The malachim are losing. The malachim are losing their identity. The malachim are created through our work.
The malachim are the chatzir. They're the food that's being fed into Malchus.
Through our work.
And how are they? They're being created through our work.
And then, but as soon as they get there and there's a gilui to them, so then they just become.
Gili is like a sucking, like Malchus.
I think the gil is a result of our work also. It doesn't just happen.
Created
He doesn't say that exactly. So the malachim.
It says Kasher Melem K'tzas Gili Yisrael. Doesn't know his mitzvah.
No, but he does. Because I told you before. He said Eilim and Chlom b'chinas Malchus.
Yeah. They get consumed by into Malchus.
But that's Ayidei Abir and Tzutzah Shnisham so Mevada Lamato. That's what he says
They're
clearly.
created through the Bir and the Tzutzas.
Yeah. But the probably the
Sha'ayidei Mevada Lamato Eilim and Chlom b'chinas Malchus.
Right. When there's a Gili Yisrael for Malchus, they get consumed into Malchus.
That's the gili is through our Aveda.
Yeah, it doesn't say here. Some is talking about the angels are created by the Bira, but the
when you read V'yetzim Meshosem Hem Hamalachim Shemisavim B'chol Yem Al Dei Berurim Hanetzutzes Sham Sham Mevarim Lamata V'Elim V'Nechlolim B'chinas Malchus.
Right.
That's through the Aveda of Mevarim Lamata. That causes them to be elevated and be nichlam b'chinas Malchus.
They're created.
No. But there's no connection between those two words.
And where they go up.
No. That
Different type of malach.
Explains why they're Eleven Nichlan B'chinas Malchus.
they're eilev b'chinas Ayidein sin sham sham mevarim. That's how they're eilev b'nichlam. That's simple meaning. Don't read further. Before Aval Zen Nemar. What you say to Messiah? Malachim shemisavim b'chol yem. Malachim that are created every day through the Berunah Tzutzes. So that we're Mavar Lamata, Va'elim, and those Malachim that we create are Elim and Nechlolim B'chinas Malchus. But what does that mean? Why are they Elim and Nechlolim B'chinas Malchus?
Then he explains.
No, tell me why are they Elim and Nechlolim B'chinas Malchus? Because our Aveda is causing them to do that. That's simple.
Aveda is creating them.
And then what? Then they sit around? And what happens next?
Then when there's a Negili from Malchus, then they get consumed into Malchus.
No. Yetzim Meshoshev are neshamas that are malachim created by us, that our creation causes them to be Eilev and Nichel B'chinas Malchus. Don't read further, that's what it means here. How else would you explain? So why is he saying Eilev and Nichel? He should stop there and say, now another thing happens. Another thing happens that something causes them to elevate. No, that's not
whatever the
pshat.
cause is, this is growth. Their growth. This is the Sameach, how it grows. And the others are high.
Who's Matzmiach? Who's Pashtus Matzmiach here? Who's the Matzmiach? Who's No. Malachim are the Chatzir.
That's the Chatzir.
The Yidden are Matzmiach the Chatzir.
Right, the Idn are Matzmiach.
Matzmiach.
Okay, who's planting it? The Idn are Matzmiach. Behema is the Ban. That's Malchus. This Chatzir are these Malachim.
Chatzir growth. The food.
Right, and they are now Nichla Malchus. Because they were initially created as Sag Mugbelas. And when they have a higher gili in B'chinas Malchus, from Malchus, Harim is Batelas, Elim v'Nichlon B'chinas Malchus. Okay. To me it looks like it's all through the Aveda. But fine, there's two steps here. So now Behema Rabba, let's go back to that. So Behema Rabba, drinking the water is the similar thing as like consuming the chatzir, basically.
Opens up the mouth, everything goes in.
And that causes So chatzir lebehema. So the chatzir loses its personality as it enters into the behema, which is malchus, through a higher gili of malchus. The lower gili of malchus loses its personality basically as it's sucked into the higher gili of malchus.
Malchus gets stronger in a way.
That's essentially how it's working here. Is that right?
I think so.
Well, that's that. But the malachim that are called Eimdim, they could remain standing. Sheichim l'kal b'sev enim is batan basagosam. They remain standing because they could remain there. Here,
It's like when there's a hurricane,
The only
you can stand there and not get
Amdim
consumed.
is their share guys, not the Yotzer guys. That's all.
yeah. Why? Because these angels, the Asher Meshosov, which is the Srafim, their root and source is from a higher level. The B'derech Klal, now he's saying, what are the levels? B'derech Klal Zel Beis HaMadrig is the Tzameach v'Chai. Generally, these are the two levels of Tzameach and Chai. Tzameach would be, that's the Chatzir. That would be
Right.
the lower, that's Yetzer Meshosov. So they're a level of Tzameach, and for them to appreciate the next level, remember we said Tzameach is far more like Daimim. For them to appreciate, they need to be swallowed up, so to speak, and be sucked in, to get to be sucked in and gulped in, and they lose their thing, they get in a higher Gili now because they're limited. And Chai is already a level that is midas that are connected to Meichen, as he said.
That was the Chasaga.
They have a saga, they have comprehension, so they can remain standing and relate to the experience from a higher level, but it's still higher. It's still like Bina, not Chachma. It's still,
Even though it's a fiery passion, but they could
Yeah.
relate to.
wow, it's very technical here, but okay. Now he's concluding the beginning what he said. Yuva mashal lopamnin kam shocha b'shem esis, ulopamim b'shem sidus. Remember the beginning of the chapter when he started explaining. He says, "Let's understand how the difference between the hamshacha that goes in Atzilus for Atzilus and for Biyah." He says we'll understand it by first understanding the difference between esis and sidus, and then he went from there into Nekudas Sfira and Partzuf. He's bringing it all back now.
Beginning of the Maimon, not the chapter.
Beginning of the Maimon.
Yeah, Maimon.
Chapter 145. So now we'll understand the difference between the two.
Binyan HaMalchus.
Okay. Letters are the actual sound, the actual personality of the sound. When you make you say Aleph, Beis, Gimel, it's the same sound. The only thing is, Aleph, Beis, Gimel is a contracted, is a, let's call focus sound. But it's the same kol. El shakel hu poshet ukshemischalek la'avodas ha'esis nishtanek tzas muhusei. The difference is, a sound is poshet. It's seamless, it's shapeless. Just a sound, a plain sound. Plain is a good word for poshet, plain. In other words, it doesn't have any gradations. Ukshemischalek la'avodas ha'esis, and when that sound breaks into expression, avodas, expressive letters, expressed letters, avoda is expression. Nishtanek tzas, it changes a bit, muhusei. His personality changes, not that it loses its sound, it's directed. Mipnei chituch ha'esis, due to the cutout. The chituch is comes from the word cutting out, like when you cut something out, the shape, not shape, like the carved, the carving out of.
Somebody talks clear, you say he has a
Chituch hadibur means a very clear and a sharp expression. But chituch comes from the word cut. Think of it like somebody who scalped. It's like sculpted would be the word. Sculpted letters.
Sculpted. But the sound is modulation.
V'hagbalosam, and they're also their confinement. Avladaynu kamat b'muhusei, but it's still almost like it is in its original personality because it's still sound. It's sound that is directed, that's focused, that's targeted. It'll be like taking, you take water and you put, and so the water is flowing and then it flows in different paths. So the paths give it some shape, but it's still fundamentally similar like Eir is mitziyarim, like the sphere is an Eir. It's Eir, but the Eir has assumed somewhat of a shape here. That's a higher level. That's Asis. This is the actual chemer. This is the actual substance, the stuff of the letters.
Matter.
The substance.
Substance of the actual letters. We say letter aleph, beis, chemer. Now these letters are what? They're containers. They're channels for energy, for expressing something. They're not just letters. They're going to express something. Like the letters of thought, right? The letters of thought. They're containers and channels for the energy of seichel, of wisdom, of intelligence. Because you cannot, as we've discussed, seichel is just a faculty. You have a brain. The brain has a mind. But there can't be ispashtus, there can't be any extension or revelation of intelligence b'lei machshava without conscious thought. So we have a reflection of the intelligence in the letters of the thought. So think of, in letters on a page, is obviously a maisa or dibur. But in machshava there's also letters, they're more subtle. They are the conscious way of you defining an idea. So you have millions of ideas right now in your mind. Then I say to you, tell me what do you think about something particular? Let's say 2 + 2 = 4. So suddenly your mind, just like in the words of Dibur, your mind formulates an idea with parameters. It's 2 + 2 = 4. You may not say it, but you're thinking of a parameter and a confined idea that's not another idea. So there's Asius that are kelim for the Eir HaMachshava, which is Eir HaSeichel. However, this is only a reflection, not the core seichel. Nevertheless, it's not a reflection that's from some foreign entity. It's a reflection of that intelligence. When we talk about 2 + 2 = 4, or any other concept, say Meida b'miktzas chayev shvua, right? So it's a defined concept. It's not the core intelligence. It's defined with letters, with a structure and so on. But at the same time, it's also not a foreign entity. It is a continuation, like what he said with koil. It's still the core thing, except that it's a reflection of. Like, for example, the light and reflection of the sun. It's only a reflection. You look at the sunlight, it's not the sun. No question about it. It's not the sun. The sun is a whole different entity, a different intensity. You get close. The sun has its own properties, the heat, etc. But it's also not something outside of it.
It's nothing else.
Nevertheless, it's me'ein. It has nothing but being similar to its source. This is obviously very fundamental in Chassidus all the time, because this is key. Because when we talk about a yesh v'nifred, remember we spoke about Maisa before, Koyach HaMaisa. Koyach HaMaisa is not necessarily a reflection of the one who built it. Even though the Maggid was able to see that the person was blind on one eye, etc. But generally speaking, Koyach HaMaisa, you build a table, unless it's talking about a particular artist or craft, anyone could have built a table. It doesn't reflect it. Then there are things that are clear reflections of their source, but they're only reflections. They're not the source. That's what he's saying here. And this means when the Amshach is from Atzilus Shebelyon, from Medaber and Atzilus, so when you say Asius, you're saying that they are drawing down seichel straight from Medaber of Atzilus. This is the Eir HaDavuk Yuchad b'Mekere. This is an energy, a light that is Davuk, is cleaving and united with its source. But when the Ashpa is from the Tzemeach Shebelyon, meaning that it's coming from the level of Tzemeach, in Atzilus, like we learned in Atzilus, you have all 4 levels. Huyin HaSaidus. That's like Sidus, which grow. I'm not sure yet. I want to finish it because I want to see where he's going.
The other one's
That's like Sidus. They're Meisrei Mechen, as we've learned in the back, in the past, chapters earlier. They're like what's called leftovers of the intelligence. Just a glimmer. A little, you pull them, you feel it. So they're nerve endings, but they're very, very subtle connection. Very slight would be the right word. Slight. So obviously, that doesn't mean that hair has intelligence. It just means hair has power. Comes from Meichen. Shenimshich mehem ha'ora kol duhu v'nasim saidus. From them comes a ha'ora, very slight, kol duhu, like kol shu. It's a very slight reflection, and they become hairs. This is like the waste, the bottom waste, so to speak, the bottom feeding, the droppings, if you wish. I don't want to mean to be coarse. The droppings of Meichen. Shenivdel me'etzem ha-Meichen. It's completely separate from core intelligence. It's separate. You can't call it Meichen. Not like a reflection of Seichel. When you communicate an idea, you're communicating an idea. Good, it's a reflection and so on. It's lower. But it's clearly, like we said, the letters on Kol. But here, there's nothing in there from Meichen. V'nasim emsidus, only thing that became something, some glimpse, some glimmer of energy shines through. Think of it like think of it almost like an airtight case that has a lot of energy inside of it, and there's a crack in the barrel. So you see, what do you see? You see a little, what are they called? The cracks that let a drop of light come through. That's what a Saida is, b'sheirush enyonim. In a physical body, remember, we're created in the divine image, so it looks like a hair. But think of it, what it is, beruchnis, is that something in a very intense place, shpatz achares. How would you say? What would you say? Like I said, like a barrel, and you have a very small glimpse of little light coming out, and you realize there's something more in there. But what is it? It's a side. They're like a separate thing. When you cut the hairs, you don't feel any pain. That shows you how little energy they have. You pull them, you feel something, some nerve connection. But you cut them, you don't feel anything. Like, for example, writing some idea with a finger of your hand. The finger has no relationship with intelligence. Through many interfaces and intermediaries, the nefesh hamaskela is the spirit of intelligence, connects with the spirit of life, which is the finger that is moving. And a reflection is transmitted, and it manifests in the keich hatnuah, the power of movement in the blood within the finger. Interesting, he calls it blood. Why not nerve? Gid, it should say. Okay, it says hatnuah shebedam shebe'etzba. I guess because the blood brings the life. Yeah, because the life force comes through the blood. Okay, and all this comes in a separate, completely from the seichel. So the etzba, he's comparing a hair strand to a fingers that are writing an idea that after many, many interfaces, seichel is able to communicate to your hand and get it in. But you look at the hand, someone will say, his hand has that intelligence to write. Hand doesn't have the intelligence of fingers, but it carries it. And because it's so separate, that's why, in truth, the real intent, the teichen kavanasi, the core, the teichen, the content, and the intention of the writer, you can't really bring into writing. Like a person, like the thoughts of a person's heart, innermost thoughts in his heart, a person cannot write. Like kasvin, because it says liba l'pumalid galia is also, but he wants to say in writing. So in other words, because why? Because as much as you write, there's a disconnect. Like he says in Tanya Perek Nun 50, that you can't really explain this well
in writing. Yeah. That's in writing.
More sublime.
So more sightus. That's more sabritis. But in speaking, you can explain more your intention.
What?
His intention.
More ruchni?
1 second. Yeah. Still not. Also, this is not the way it is by yourself, the way you understand it yourself. In other words, machshava is more than that. Which means the person who's hearing it, by thinking about it and estimating and like trying to imagine, you can come to the Pnimis HaKavana through Dibur. That's what he's saying here. So in other words, in Ksav, it's harder to really give out the deepest intention. In speaking, it's still not like it is to yourself, but there, you can explain more. And the only thing it is, you could require more thought and hasharas haseichel, meaning that the person has to see it hidden in there. Yochalavik, he can come to the Pnimis HaKavanim, to the inner intention. Like he says there in Tanya, there, chapter 50, Rakol ish nilvav v'novin hamaskil adover u'maymek l'kasha daiti v'tfanose b'Hashem yimtze tei ve'er agonis b'nafshi hamaskelis. That's the actual Lashon in Tanya, I believe. Correct?
Has to be.
Yeah. Now what does he say? So in the beginning he says, you can't really explain this in writing. That kol ish nilvav v'novin, a person that has a heart, a feel for it, and novin, a comprehension, hamaskil al dover, u'maymek l'kasha daiti, and he invests in maimek, he engrosses himself to connect his das, his mind, his understanding and his comprehension. B'Hashem, Sfunasa, yeah. B'Hashem yimtze teiv, he'll find the good, ve'er hagon, the good and energy light that's hidden b'nafshei hamaskelis. That's hidden in his nefesh hamaskelis. You see the lashon?
Yeah.
Is exactly that lashon?
Yeah.
What's EFsha? What is he talking about?
It says, what's he talking about before that?
That's the difference between saying and writing. You can have elements of like Shira V'Zimra mixed in. You can go through a whole different dimension, intonations and stuff like that. And you can express that in writing. No? Yes, boy.
Okay, yeah. It's an interesting expression in Tanya. So he's explaining it. So we see here that b'michtav you can't give it over, which means the Alter Rebbe in Tanya can't. He's saying afterwards you could. So he's saying it's more like a speaking. Once you mimic, because it's a contradiction here. Tanya says you can't say it b'michtav, but then he says you could if you concentrate. And here he wants to say in Ayin Beis that it's only in Dibur, not in Ksav. So he's saying that is like similar to a person applying himself into really hearing it as if it was spoken to him. You have to say that's what he's saying.
In the beginning, he starts off. He's talking about the person who's expressing it, that he can't. And then he's here.
He's saying, but
it's just the person who's receiving it.
Okay, but it's totally bezeh. In Dibur you could. He's basically saying, I guess, with that type of concentration, you get closer to a type of comprehension like that. Even though in other words, Alter Rebbe's Tanya also has the power of Dibur K'tzas. That's what he's saying. It's also like as if he spoke it. No, like not just Ksav, but also Dibur. That's what it sounds like. That's what it says. So what do we know from this? That the Seichel Hanal, this intelligence, is the level of Daimim and Semeach. She'ena be'erech l'gabi Seichel HaChai. The Kol Shkein B'chinas Medaber. So what's Daimim and Semeach? He just said it's Semeach and Chai.
Which Seichel Hanal?
That's what we're trying to figure out here. One second. Let me get back here. Tzemeach the Tzemeach is like the Sidus. So Daimim Tzemeach would be what? Daimim is the actual Chemer HaEsius, the actual substance of the letters, right? Yeah, that's what it is.
That's Dibur, and then writing is alright.
Hold on. That 1 second. The Asius and Kalim the air. The Asius are Kalim for some air. 1 second. So Dibur is like Tzemeach, I think.
You said so on the previous page, I think.
I don't know which is which. I can't figure it out.
If you read further on,
Deeper analysis is
I think it comes a little bit.
It says Dibur Yachal Levar Yeser, so that's Tzemech. And then the Isis Ksiva.
So Ksav is Daimim.
And the Ksiva says the Seichel Betz Bayad.
That's like Sidus. That's like Daimim. That's Daimim. That's Daimim.
Right.
Very little energy there. And then you're saying Dibur. You're saying is Tzemeach. Maybe.
Then it says Kmei Adach Mashal Ksiva, so it's a Hemshech. And then Dibur Yachal Levar Yeser Techem, so that's Tzemech.
Maybe. Well, it does fit what he said earlier, because he did say Dibur, if you remember, but Dibur is also Bria. That's how you combine the letters. Let me see what the end here, then we'll figure it all out. And the she'enu berech l'gabe seichel hachai v'kolshkin b'chnis ha'medaber. It's not be'erech, it's not commensurate to the intelligence of Chai and the intelligence of, and for sure that of Medaber. And this is the difference, now going back again to the beginning of the Maimer, between the Ishtalshus of the spheres themselves, im l'tzerech Atzilus, if it's for the purpose, the need of Atzilus, or for the need of Biyah. The l'tzerech Atzilus atzmai, hibchinas Atzilus shebachol ha'madregas. For Atzilus itself, you have to have, is the level of Atzilus in all these levels. Remember, Atzilus within Atzilus. Even though it's only a reflection, nevertheless, it has a relationship to the core. But in Atzilus itself, which was transmitted in the form of a order, min chachma bina lezah umezah lamalchus. From Chacham Bina to Zah to Midas, and Mizah from Midas to Malchus, L'tzedek Biyah, for the need of B'yiriyat Siyasiyah, Harizeh Rak B'pchinas Tatzach. It's only from the level of Daimim Tzemeach Chai Shabel Yen Shabab B'chinas Nivdil Min Ha'etzah. Daimim Tzemeach Chai from the higher level that is separate from the core.
That's not the Arab saying Chai Medaber. Now he's saying now he's grouping the sound together.
In the summary, the Kitzur is easier to understand it. He spells it out clearer, I see. All the levels. I know it. Let's read the Kitzur, it'll just help us understand this. We can go back to the end of the Maimer. So he says, V'adugma l'mayla b'chinas malchus mokri yisavus. The example for this, above, too low, right?
But you were laying low. No.
Has to be for this tomorrow. Is the mokkos out the Buddha shal Kadosh Baruch Hu chashav ma'aseh k'shemekabelas mechitzeni yisod. That's when it receives from the outer dimension of Yesod, as he said. Right. The Maisu Keich Nivla is Zebchin Daimon. Maisu, which is a separate power force, is Daimon. The Dibur Shazel Kishmakabelos Metifer Zebchin Tzemeach Shemer B'Yitzira. Dibur is receives from Tefer, that Semer that illuminates in Yitzira. Etzem Nekudas HaMalchus HaBekeres HaSaparsa. The core point of Malchus that pierces the curtain. Umeir Bebriya Zeh B'Chinas Chai, and radiates in Briya, that's Chai. Malchus Kameshi Batzil Zeh B'Chinas Medaber. V'zeu Abiyasha B'Malchus. Okay, clear. Now he's going to explain it. Here you see he spells it all out. Chenu B'Asfiras Shalamayla. Same thing in the higher spheres. He didn't say this inside. He said it's bina, but bria, like we said, seichel shebebriya. That's the seichel in bria. In other words, what he called before bina shebechesed. V'chochma shleima seichel hatzilus. Shleima is chochma tzil. Malachim yitzim misharsim amisavim b'mebirim anichlolim nechol machos zebchinis tzemeach. That's in other words yitzira, yitzir. Oh, they're higher? No, yeah. That's the stuff. I'm fine. Yeah, that's Chai, that's B'riya. That's like B'tzal. Yeah, we said that right. So now he's spelling it out. The Amshach of Asis, which are Kalim, to the Seichel, they're Me'ena Etzem. That's Atzilus. Atzilus is Me'ena Etzem. Remember he said it's not the Etzem, but it's reflective of the Etzem. That's Atzilus. So Asius is Atzilus. Sidus, who Amshach B'chinas Tzemeach. Sidus is Tzemeach. So he jumped from Atzilus to Yitzira. Ukma Asius Aksav. That's like letters of the writing. So Asius, so basically it's Atzilus and Yitzira. Or Medaber and Tzemeach. And Tzemeach. One second. V'zeu da hamshach l'tzerech tzil b'chinas atzil shebechol sfira l'tzerech b'yam b'chinas datzach.
This is the part where
What is that? Atzilus is parallel to Medaber?
He's skipping around. The thing is, it's not so black. It's not. Atzilus is always Medaber. Yeah, for sure. One second. He
keeps changing from world to Datzchan.
I think it's correct to say that Asis Aksav is probably Daimon. The problem is Asis. No, it's not good. No, Asis Aksav is not a good example. No. Remember, Asis are a keli to the Seichel, not Sidus.
They're real.
Sidus is like the finger, not the Asis. That's the key. I got it. The finger that expresses is like Sidus. That's Daimon.
That's what we were saying.
Yeah. Asis that you speak or even write is not Daimon. That is more probably Tzemeach and Chai. That's probably what it is. Yeah, that's what it is.
They seem so close, and we always know that Daimon and Tzemeach are very close.
He says here clearly, he says, aside from B'chinas Meiser Meichin, and then he continues, he says the Seichel Betz Bayad.
That's like the Daimon.
Put them together.
But Sidus is Tzemeach. No, I'm sorry, it's Tzemeach. Sidus is Tzemeach. Sidus is Tzemeach. Sidus is Tzemeach, and Asis are Atzilus. He skips Chai. There's no Chai in that example. That's the bottom line.
What's Asis Dibber?
Asis Dibber is like Atzilus. Asis Dibber seems to me to be. It's not black and white clear, especially in the kids.
There's another level over here, which is Mamik Lakasha Daitit Vitunasa.
He really says it.
Okay, let's go back.
When we were learning it, we also noticed that it was missing Chai. Where's Daimon? doesn't have Daimon Meir.
Okay, look, I have to go through this again slowly and figure out the levels. But one thing is for sure, the general picture is clear. That Atzilus, for the Tzedach Atzilus, you need to have the higher level. Atzilus is essentially, we spoke Gilead Helam, Atzilus is a reflection of the divine. Biyah is not. So when the Ovis are bringing into the world a Gilui, they're bringing a Gilui that's commensurate to existence. It's not Meichem Be'etzem. That's the bottom line. So there's, in Atzilus itself, Daimon Tzameach Chai in Atzilus, that's primarily focused for Biyah, because Biyah is Daimon Tzameach Chai, in the general sense. So there's also, in Atzilus, Daimon Tzameach Chai is for that. And for Atzilus itself, you need to have the Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus, basically, which is the Chochmah, the Meichem Be'etzem. How exactly it figures in all these levels, we know some of them. We know with Betzalel is Bria, and Shlomo is Atzilus. That's clear. That he says Befedish. In Sfiris, Betzalel is Bina of Chesed, and Shlomo is Chochmah of Chesed. It's two higher levels. So you could say Betzalel is Chai, and Shlomo is Medaber. In the Malachim, we know that the Tzameach Malachim is, which is Yitzira, would be Yetzer Misharsov, which is a lower level, and you have Shurafim is Bria, is like Betzalel, that's Chai. And then in the final part of the chapter, where he talks about Tzameach and Chai, Asius and Sidus, it seems like on the bottom level, Asius is Atzilus, and Sidus is Yitzira, is Tzameach. And he doesn't speak about Chai and Daimon. Doesn't speak about Chai and Daimon. That's what it appears. But then he throws in somewhere here, like here, he says, Sechel, Habachin Daimon Tzameach, Sheina Be'erech, L'gabe Sechel. V'zehu hu da Sechel, an Habachin Daimon Tzameach. So he does say something, but we have to figure out what was what. That's the problem here. But generally speaking, that's the picture that we just said here. Because in the Kitzur doesn't go into more detail than I just said. So again, Asius is Kalim of Atzilus. Like they express the idea. They're Me'enat. Cyrus is already a jump. That's already the level of Tzemeach. I guess in that itself, each one has several levels. That's what we have to work out. But I have to read it slower again.
It also has an element of Daimon, and Cyrus also has an element of
right. It's not black and white clear, but the idea is clear.
When we're talking about Isis being a reflection of Atzilus, is that the combination of Medaber and Chai?
I'm sorry?
Is it when we're talking about Isis reflecting Atzilus, is that the combination of Medaber and Chai?
Not necessarily. If he says it's Seichel, it's like it's Medaber.
It's not like Mitzvah.
No, it doesn't say that.
No, I know, it doesn't say.
I wouldn't say that. It just confuses matters. He calls it Atzilus. I think there's also another key component here. There's the Kalim of Atzilus, there's the Eris of Atzilus. The Kalim of Atzilus are like Osius. They reflect Atzilus. The part of Atzilus that's to go into Biyah is more like Cyrus. That's what I think he's also saying here. So you have to distinguish between the Kalim of Atzilus, the Eris. He says, remember, he says the Kalim. He's saying, Isis Ekim Le'echad, Isis HaMachshava, and Kim Le'era Sechel, Shar Irsh, this Pashas Gal Sechel, Play Machshava. Here it sounds like it's the Kalim of Atzilus are a container for the flow of the energy. I'm going to stop here because this I see is a whole piece here. I want to read it, learn it properly. So we do the second part of chapter 148. 1 second. What did we do? We did page 287 through 289.